Denz. Congratulations for making it this far. Good luck.
Hello everyone, my name is Greg. I'll be one of your panelists. Congratulations for making it this far. Good luck to the round.
Hello everyone, my name is Jescii. Good luck and congrats.
Hello everyone, my name is Kiarra. Congrats, good luck.
Hi everyone, I am Mario. I hope you're game. Have fun. Good luck.
Hi everyone, Zhea here. All the best. Good luck.
All right. Thank you so much, judges. For last time of this tournament, just a couple of reminder. First, please observe proper decorum and abide to the equity policies of this tournament. Second, use the time wisely. I'll be timing in my device, but I suggest you time yourself. Just be sure don't go over time. But lastly, POIs are not mandatory, but it is highly, highly encouraged, given that we are already in the grand finals of the Pilipinas Novice debates. Now, debating in the motion, this House believes that Rodrigo Duterte should face trial in the Philippine courts. I now call on Prime Minister. You're here.
Wait, can you give me 15 seconds to set up my timer?
Yeah, no worries.
Okay. I'll just start with shout outs first. So I'd like to shout out our moderators in our institution. So that's Tita Ryan and Tita Jaiza. I would also like to shout out my partner, who's been my partner for like what 2 years now, Tien. Um, Also, I would like to shout out our SBCEC debate varsity. Our instimates is also our opening opposition, Princess and Jescii. Also, our other instimates who, what do you call this, competed earlier in the high school grand finals, Sid and Bang. Also, our parents, Tita Rafi, for having no class tomorrow because we're excused. And then lastly, our very beloved Ate Adi. Okay. I would like to start my speech in 3, 2, 1. So, panel, this is how my speech is going to go. I'm going to go into framing and I'm going to go into my characterization of key terms and context, problems, stakeholders, urgency, impacts, standards and burden fulfillment mechanism. Also, in terms of my two extremely well made arguments, my preemptions, and lastly, my weighing. Okay, so to start into my framing. So, this debate is not about whether Duterte deserves accountability. He does. This debate is about where legitimate justice should actually happen. Right now, Duterte is actually detained by the ICC, a foreign court, even though the alleged acts happened in the Philippines and affected Filipino citizens. We believe justice should happen where the harm occurred and where the people affected can see and actually participate in it. Justice must be fair, lawful, and owned by the own people. That's what we are actually saying aside government. In terms of my characterization of key terms in this motion. Okay, first we have Rodrigo Duterte. He is a former Philippine president, currently detained by the ICC. He has not yet been convicted for alleged acts committed within the Philippines or his war on crime. Second is in terms of what does face trial actually look like? This is to undergo a full legal process with defense, evidence, and judgment, not just detention abroad. Third is regarding Philippine courts. The Philippine courts is the country's official courts, which have primary authority over crimes committed in Philippine soil as a whole. Lastly is what in this debate, what is the key term of should? Should is what is right and legitimate for delivering justice, not merely what is actually convenient. So the question really is simple in this debate. Should justice be delivered by Filipinos at home or by a foreign court abroad? That's the main question that we're trying to answer. In terms of context, the alleged actions occur domestically and involve Filipino victims. The Philippines has functioning courts capable of conducting complex trials, and we even have mechanisms later to actually further enhance these because we also have preemptions that they may bring up. It is a problem when justice is handled abroad. First, victims are actually separated from the actual process. Second is the fact that domestic institutions are actually weakened because people don't see the capability and the capabilities of these domestic institutions. And third is the fact that accountability feels imposed from outside. Lastly, society cannot actually collectively confront the past, which is the past is the term of Rodrigo Duterte. Okay, in terms of stakeholders, who are the stakeholders? First is the families of the the victims. Second is the Filipino citizens as a whole, because they're the most important. Third is the Philippine justice system. Fourth is the future leaders who is actually going to be in presidency, for example. Lastly is the Philippine democracy. What is most democratic as a whole. In terms of urgency, if leaders can avoid facing domestic courts, it signals that power can place individuals above the nation's laws. It is basically okay. Next is the fact that it is appropriate and only right that the Filipino people, through their own laws, to say, quote unquote, never again to Duterte on his war on drugs. We're not saying Duterte should be freed, but it's morally right that the Filipinos who are actually affected are the ones that are saying never again to Duterte. And also the problem, why is it so urgent, is because other leaders may think that the ICC is the only way that justice should be fulfilled, meaning they don't fear their own domestic institutions, making it not reliable anymore. In terms of impacts, first is regarding the trust in rule of law. Second is regarding the strength of institutions. Third is regarding national healing. And lastly is regarding the future deterrence of what's actually going to happen. In terms of our standards and burden of fulfillment, we should actually prove that domestic trial must produce the following. First is more legitimate justice. Second is stronger institutions as a whole. Third is a greater victim participation. And lastly is a better long-term democratic outcomes that will actually make a bigger difference in the future. In terms of our mechanisms, this is actually this house believes that motion. So we don't actually require to pass a policy or a model, but what we actually believe in and what we actually think is right. But we still have mechanisms under this to make it actually completely perfect. Okay, first should be the transfer of custody. The Philippine government requests Duterte's transfer from ICC custody for domestic trial and to bring him back to the Philippines. Second should be special independent court. So a designated court division handles the case, insulated from any political pressure. Third should be full due process. So Duterte receives all legal rights. For example, counsel, evidence, presumption of innocence, and so on and so forth. And then there should be transparency. Proceedings are public and covered by entire media, and no matter what, any kind of court case should be done through full transparency. Fifth is outside monitoring, which means that international observers are still invited to monitor fairness and credibility, and to also give backlash in case any of those were not to happen. Six, in terms of witness and victim protection, so there are strong safeguards ensure the safe participation of these witnesses and victims. Lastly, should be appeal processes, which means that decisions can be reviewed by higher Philippine courts at the very end of the day, which is and these courts, in terms of my two arguments. First argument is regarding justice only restores trust when citizens see that it comes from their own institutions. My premise for this panel is the fact that courts are not just punishment tools, they are symbols of the rule of law. My reasoning: when a foreign court judges a former leader, many citizens will see the outcome as external interference rather than true accountability. This allows supporters to dismiss the verdict as political or colonial pressure. This actually deepens the division instead of resolving it. A domestic trial forces all sides to actually engage with the same legal process, evidence, and judgment within the country's own system. Even those who disagree must recognize that the decision comes from institutions they are bound to actually respect as citizens. In terms of incentive analysis, this actually strengthens public trust in courts and discourages future leaders from abusing power because they know they will be judged at home. They will be judged at home or in the Philippines. In terms of harms and benefits analysis, this restores confidence in the whole justice system, not just for the people, but for the entire country as a whole. Second is that there will be a harm avoided, the perception that accountability is foreign imposed. In terms of impact, long-term stability of democratic institutions. Okay, in terms of my second argument, is leaders are more constrained when they know that they will face their own courts and public backlash from their own people. My premise for this is the fact that external prosecution feels distant and avoidable. Domestic prosecution is immediate and politically costly. Okay, in terms of reasoning, future officials operate inside the Philippine systems, not international ones. If punishments only comes from abroad, leaders may think that they can evade it through alliances or treaty withdrawal, but the domestic trial exposes wrongdoing directly to its citizens, risking loss of legitimacy, reputation, and political survival. It also sets a clear precedent that no office actually grants immunity after the said power. In terms of incentive analysis, this creates a culture where leaders fear both legal consequences and voter backlash at the end of the day. In terms of impact, safer governance because leaders know they will answer to their own courts and their own people. In terms of my preemptions, first, the fact that they may mention that Philippine courts are corrupt, only the ICC can deliver justice. But corruption is not a reason to remove the case from Philippine jurisdiction. It is a reason to combine domestic authority with international guidance and transparency. Our position is not Philippines as a whole, nor ICC takeover. It is Philippine filling courts with international monitoring and assistance. This approach keeps justice legitimate to Filipinos while addressing concerns about bias, sending the case entirely to the ICC abandons the Philippine justice system instead of strengthening it. Monitoring strengthens, substitution weakens. If corrupt, and they might also say that if corruption is real, he will manipulate the trial. But a domestically owned but internationally monitored trial is precisely what actually limits the manipulation. Corruption thrives when cases are obscure. This case would be first highly public, closely watched domestically and internationally, and it also subject to reputational consequences for misconduct. And lastly, influence is harder to exercise in a transparent national trial than in a distant foreign proceeding where local citizens cannot observe directly. And the reason why we're very proud to propose is because we actually already take down the entire case of opposition, and we prove that their case will not stand in this debate because ours is so strong. Thank you very much.
Thank you for that wonderful speech. Now to open the case for opposition, I now call on LO. Here.
Hello. Can I be heard?
We can hear you, but we can hear some echo.
Oh. Is it rated? Sorry, wait. I'll try to move closer to my mic. I think it's a room. Is that better? No.
Yeah, I think it's better.
Okay. Hi, Princess Alisada. Wait. I'll get my timer. Hi, Princess Alisada. First, a few shout-outs before I begin my speech. This is my last debate as like a high schooler. First, to Ate Ade, our GOAT, best mother. Also to the SBCEC debate varsity, Tiana and William, the OG. That's also our instimates. Also to Sid, Bang, Alana, and my juniors. To our moderators, Tita Ryan for always pushing us to be better, forcing us to debate, and always like cooking us in trainings. Tita Jescii for the moral support. Also to Tita Rafi for cutting our classes tomorrow because we're here debating. And then to my parents for supporting me through my debate career, even though they don't understand what I'm doing half the time. And of course, to my partner, Jescii, who's able to bring me here. Thank you so much for carrying me throughout. Okay, so with that out of the way, I will begin my speech in 3, 2, 1. In a country where leadership is divided even at the highest level, turning the courts into a battlefield between administrations risks pulling the entire system into the conflict. 2 pushes in this debate panel. First, they simply say that we must be more autonomous because we want the people from the ground up to see how these are going. The very problem is we don't take into account the situation in the Philippines where people don't exactly have voter education, the best voter education, where they can easily be influenced by certain skews in the political scene. Moreover, you're dragging this conflict into a situation where there is very clear divide in factions wherein the political parties are fighting against each other and turning on each other, where there are multiple trials that are already going on and taking up the capacity of the government. It's very hard to assume that this would be good for the Philippines in general. It would be good for the people, for the results in general, and it would even show fair results to the international community. First view framing and setup panel. The urgency of this is the fact that currently the political state of the Philippines is already bad enough. The fact that the president and vice president are fighting each other, the fact that there are already multiple problems about corruption, dragging this problem into the Philippines is outside of their capacity and further doesn't speak well, as well as the fact that currently, the way it's framed by the opening government will engage with that. Likely they want to establish that, they want to take it back from the ICC. Let's question the credibility of the government when that happens, panel. When you say you are pushing for this to happen after you've already given it to the ICC or the ICC is already doing things, that questions your credibility as a nation. Firstly, first 3 pushes. First, when top executive officials are already in open conflict, the trust of the international community and the people itself is already fragile. Adding the trial of a former president is all worse. It will create more fragmentalization in factions. Secondly, any prosecutions that will happen will already be doubted. We won't say it's obviously going to be corrupt or anything, but they're already going to be doubted by the people, by the international community. Third, the fact that this is high profile would worsen the polarization that happens. In a stable environment, and probably in the US, if there's were to happen, you can control this. But this is a fractured landscape, again, where things are controlled by politicians, where people are siding with each other. It compounds instability as a whole. The goal in this debate panel is for justice and fair trials, as well as in a way that allows room for non-influence in future elections. It shouldn't skew the results of future elections, and it should still, at the very least, in the best way, remain people's faith in the government. So the counterfactual looks like, keeping it in the international crime courts, looks like evidence being evaluated again under international standards, proceeding coming from like the current things that already do happen, and then not even tying it to like the Philippine electoral like results and those kinds of things. So what this pushes for is actually three things. Is number one, neutral results, because again, international courts operate outside like the party politics of the Philippines, the way their processes work, the way also the voters view these kinds of things. It's a neutral stance by the international community, not by the Philippines. Secondly, also unity. At least it promotes for more unity within the Philippines, within the Philippine elections. It's not a Filipino against Filipino or Filipino choosing something. It's as a whole, these Philippines, it's just like with the international community seeing the results. Wrapping up after my first argument. Thirdly, on capacity, the domestic institutions, for example, like the Philippines, right? We don't have enough capacity to deal with these things. We're already like tight on all of these things. So what are my arguments then? First of all, is the fact that it will likely politicize and skew results. Like even if we're assuming the best case scenario that this is done well, right? It will still affect elections. The fact that the verdict will be read, like people will already doubt the verdict because people already doubt the way the system is done in the Philippines. What this does is like also it's bad for the third themselves. They probably see it as an invalid, like whatever the results are, whether they're good or bad, it will be seen as invalid by the people. But moreover on that, it will affect the way voters view the Philippines. It will skew elections. People who might not even deserve to be in the elections might get away into these elections because of how these results are viewed. Because, for example, this person sided with Duterte, and now he's more likely for me to vote him because I like the way he did these specific things, even if they didn't do anything like credibly good. Second, also if he's like acquitted here or like the results come out here, like it could raise more problems for the Philippines politically because they're already turning on each other when people don't even know who to vote. So under our world, at the least, the international forum, like they don't have to base their decisions on those kinds of things. People don't doubt it as much. And even the Filipinos have that mindset, like even assuming the best case scenario, Filipinos have that mindset where it sits like at least, America or like these international courts would be outside of those things. So I'll take a POI. 3,
If we follow your logic and outsource our most significant cases to foreign courts every time our system faces a challenge, at what specific point in history do you expect the Philippine judiciary to actually become effective?
I say it's when it's to the point where your own president is committing the crimes, when it's to the point where you can't do anything about it. I also want to take into account the framing of the Philippine context, right? This has been in the Philippines, but they didn't take action on it because there's no credible, tangible evidence that they could actually do on it. So I hope that tackles your question, right? So second, pulling out of the ICC also sends a bad message to the international community. Saying this, right? Like you want to be independent, but previously this problem has been given to the Philippines. The fact is the ICC stands there because the Philippines has been incompetent previously. So if we're buying into your framing that we're going to do this after it's been implemented in the Philippines or after this message has been sent out to the Filipinos where like they're doing nothing and after the ICC has implemented this, then it looks like inconsistency. It looks like the Philippines already giving it to the ICC, but then like taking it back. So what that does is, firstly, it undermines like the legal coherence of the Philippines. Like they've already like given this to the ICC. Like the fact is, you've already acknowledged it that Duterte is in the Hague. He's already going under this. If you do this, if you take them back, this weakens the country's ability to take clear international positions as a whole. What does that mean, right? We're already incredible as a country. We've already proven like we're not capable of doing this. How much more if you take them back from the ICC and say like, never mind, let me change my mind and like try to do this. The impact is then you can't have as much credibility in negotiating future things. And for example, ICC, like in the future, it ruins your relationship with ICC. Like again, let me flip that rebuttal on you. In the future, what extent can you say that you're going to be able to rely on the ICC when you took your situation from Duterte back, like right now? Second, it also like triggers like tension with other countries, like the fact that the Philippines isn't really politically stable, let's not ally with them. So that also affects like whether like the way they see your proceedings, the way they see you as a credible country. The impact then, the reason we win over all houses and is because our impacts accrue to multiple stakeholders. We're able to prove the urgency of this debate, wherein you can't exactly believe the side of the entire government because of the way this Philippine structure is right now, because of the way the political scene is now, because how voters exist in the Philippines. We're able to tackle that nuance. We're also able to see the irreversibility that exists in this debate, wherein there will be systemic collapse, wherein people don't view you the same way, wherein voters skew results that cannot be changed. And because of the scale of in which this debate exists, we win all of that. Proud to propose. Thank you.
Thank you for that wonderful speech. Now to extend the case for opening government, calling on DPM. You're here.
Okay. Good afternoon. Give me a moment, please, to set up my timer. Okay. I'd like to now start my speech in. Oh, wait, let me do some shout outs first, if that's okay. I want to give some shout outs to our moderators, Tito Ryan and Tita Jescii, to the SBCEC Debate Varsity, to Ate Adi, to our parents, God, our Instamates, as mentioned before, Princess Francesca in the opening opposition, and lastly, our school principal, Tito Rafi, who gave us no class tomorrow. Okay, I'd like to now start my speech in 3, 2, 1, go. Let me give a simple analogy to this debate. Let's imagine a village where there's a powerful man who's continuously breaking the fences of their neighbors, for example. And after years, the elders in this village are too afraid to speak up. And finally, this man ended up being caught. Opposition is basically saying that we should send this man to a city court 10 miles away on the grounds that because the elders in our own village are too weak to actually trial him. However, we are saying that no, we should not send him away, because if we send him away, we're basically saying that our elders, our own systems will stay weak forever. And to basically say, we believe that the fact that the Philippines, in order to truly heal and for its laws to actually be meaningful, the trial must happen on the soil where the very blood of the drug war was spilled. So let me go on now to quickly rebuild the government stance. Opening government is supporting a specialized domestic tribunal, likely a reinforced Sandiganbayan, for example, or ombudsman, where again, as mentioned by my first peer, it is monitored by international observers and law experts to again minimize conflict of interest or even inconsistency. Second, and we support basically a process where the Philippine flag is the one flying over the courtroom, not the ICC flag, where we ensure when the verdict is delivered or read, it is the Filipino people through their own laws saying never again to the war on drugs and to the Duterte regime. So to quickly rebut the inaction argument by the leader of the opposition claims that the inaction will basically inhibit the actual effectivity of these courts. I have two reasons to actually rebut this. In the real world already, the Philippine government has already demonstrated the political will to act by arresting and surrendering Duterte. Even has not probably mistakes. The fact that he was arrested on the Philippine soil shows already the government's current political will. A move that shows that the executive as well as the law enforcement are no longer shielded by Duterte alone or his other people. So, and to clearly illustrate this, our courts already in status quo have already begun the heavy lifting. We have convicted high-profile individuals like status quo or even the contractors or even our own senators like Bong Revilla, for example. All of these people who we believe would never be tried, yet they have been on trial today. To conclude this, to argue in action now is to ignore the reality that the Philippine system has already broken the seal of impunity by the Duterte regime. We should not reward this progress by sending the final victory to foreign courts. So let me go now to my arguments. My first argument is that a domestic trial is necessary for national psychological healing. One reason we support this, when an international body tries a local leader, for example, it creates the martyr versus the world narrative, which the Duterte base is already using to exploit. A domestic trial strips away this foreign interference shield, which the Duterte base is already using, forcing the nation to confront the evidence as a community, as a people. To illustrate this, for example, let's imagine, let's say, a child who's punished, let's say, by a stranger who often feel resentment towards this person. However, a child disciplined by their own parent is forced to reflect on their actions itself. To conclude this, to truly move past the war on drugs, the Philippines must be the one to perform this trial, to actually ensure that the wound won't fester and actually turn into a populist agenda or marketing campaign. And my second argument, in principle, opening government is upholding the principle of judicial autonomy and sovereign responsibility, to further extend on my prime minister. My only reason to support this is that the ultimate test of a nation's maturity and sovereignty is its ability to clean its own house or to actually clean out its corruption. By insisting on a domestic trial, we assert that the Philippines is not a failed state, but a robust democracy capable of holding its highest officials accountable, which we have shown in the current administration, in the current trends as well as our country. And to further illustrate this, again, as I mentioned before, there's already tangible evidence supporting the idea that the Philippines is a nation willing to trial its own leaders. For example, as mentioned before, Bong Revilla, a senator who we never believed could face jail, is now on trial for corruption. And to further clarify, opening government's not saying that this means automatic imprisonment, but the fact that he's on trial shows progress in our judicial systems. So to conclude, the trial is not just about Duterte. It is about the legitimacy of the Philippine judicial system itself. So my third argument is that domestic trial is the only way to actually achieve restorative justice that resonates with the Filipino people. Crimes committed on Philippine soil against Filipino citizens have the most direct impact on the local community. A trial in The Hague, however, feels like a remote TV show to the average Filipino. A local trial allows the victims' families from the poor or urban areas to physically attend or at least be in the proximity of these trials and hearings. To conclude this, holding a trial locally ensures that the truth-telling process is integrated within our own national consciousness, making the verdict harder to dismiss as Western meddling. And my last argument is that the trial is a necessity for the Filipino citizens to reclaim their role as the ultimate source of state power. We're the ones providing empowerment in this case. One reason to support this. When justice is exported to The Hague, the Filipino people become mere spectacles of their own history. A trial in the Philippines transforms the public from passive observers to an international drama from an international drama to active participants in a national hearing. It validates the struggles of local activists, lawyers, and the victims who stayed in the country to fight. To conclude this, bringing him home is an act of radical trust to the Filipino people and asserts that the collective conscience of the Philippines as a country is sophisticated enough to judge its own history as well as its own leaders. So two likely clashes to this debate. First, in terms of the institutional muscle of our own outsource and outsource the justice. Opposition will argue the Philippine courts are too fragile or politically compromised or too slow to handle the former president, whereas the ICC offers sanitized or a more higher standard environment. We counter this by arguing that exporting the trial to The Hague permanently stunts the growth of our judicial system. We win this clash by highlighting that the long-term democratic resilience, if we were to admit our courts can't, we create a self-fulfilling prophecy where our future leaders will never fear our local prosecution because they know that the fail-safe option is a decade-long process in a distant country. And the second, in terms of the populist martyr narrative versus domestic accountability, which we're trying to uphold, opposition fears that the local trial would become a circus would lead to civil unrest. We argued, however, that the ICC trial actually fuels Duterte's based martyr narrative by painting him as a victim of Western imperialism as was foreign meddling. That's exactly why we're taking away this key exploitation and actually trying him in our own course. So let me go into four premises to quickly weigh. In terms of sovereignty, we're the only house where we prove our laws are strong enough to judge our own leaders. Opposition, however, admits that to the world that our nations have failed state legally. And to further illustrate this harms, future leaders will again continue to ignore our local laws, fearing that they will only fear distant foreign formats. Second premise, in terms of accessibility. In government stance, poor victims and their families can actually witness justice in person or even outside the courtrooms. However, in opposition's case, justice becomes an expensive export that victims can only see on national television. In terms of stability, in our case, we rob the Dutertes of the foreign interference narrative and the populist defense that they are likely portraying currently. Well, in their case, opposition's case, they turn Duterte into a martyr being bullied by Western powers. And the last, in terms of institutional growth, it is only in our case where we force our codes to finally do the heavy lifting in order to improve. And in however, opposition's case, it creates a learned helplessness where our systems are never able to fix their own. And to quickly summarize this debate so far, it is only in government's case where we actually take away this exploitation by the Duterte base. It is only in our case where we give more empowerment to our judicial systems. And if opposition's entire case is grounded on the ineffectiveness or inaction of our judicial courts, the fact is that within this administration, within the past 4 years, we have shown progress by convicting high-profile cases. And this fact is this progress alone is enough to support the fact that we should uphold our sovereignty and we should trial him where the blood has been shed. And for all of those, we're proud to propose. Thank you.
Thank you for that wonderful speech. Now to extend the case for OO, calling on DLO. Here.
Hello, am I audible?
Yes, you are.
Hi, okay. Hi, I'm Francesca. I go by she, her pronouns. And before I start my speech, I would like to make a few shout outs because this is my first ever grand finals and my last run as a high school debater. So first, I want to shout out to Tita Ryan and Tita Jescii for always being there and for being there in all our debate competitions. I also want to shout out to Ate Adi for always supporting and believing in us. To the SBCEC Debate Varsity, who has been with me through every part of my debate journey. And obviously our Instimates, who is in the OG. And to Tito Rafi for giving us a free day tomorrow. Thank you. And of course, to my parents who have supported me in my debate journey, and lastly, of course, to my partner Princess, who I wouldn't be here without her. So yes, I will start my speech in 3, 2, 1. It's unclear to me why government has to prove credibility and accountability only through the Duterte case when there are so many other cases where the government could have done something. Like, for example, the flood control projects right now, right? Why is everyone suddenly so quiet about these flood control projects when the Filipinos have been finding credibility, have been finding evidence to where their funds actually go to? So before I proceed to my arguments, let me first proceed to my rebuttals. Against the government. So the government claims, right, that Filipinos themselves should handle Duterte's accountability, arguing that justice will only restore trust especially when it comes from these domestic institutions, and that corruption cannot justify removing Philippine jurisdiction. But then even if we accept these premises at face value, right, the Philippines again doesn't have enough capacity to do this, especially under the scrutiny of the Filipinos and the media themselves. They assume that just because the Filipinos experiences, it will alone guarantee justice for the victims, for Filipinos to see it. But then again, they also don't take into account that Duterte has many political networks and that did not disappear when he stepped down. It remains embedded in these local governments, the law enforcement, and even part of the judiciary. A domestic trial does not magically become fair just because it happens in the Philippines and in their courts, in our courts rather. Sorry. In fact, it risks becoming less legitimate with what my LO has already said. Then again, government also never answers why this Filipino-led process would suddenly be immune from the very structural weaknesses they admit exist, like for example, the flood control projects. Then again, it's not the question of whether Filipinos are able to speak on Duterte and his actions, but actually to have credibility from his past actions and whether it will actually give justice to these victims, right? The whole purpose why he was sent to ICC in the first place was because our government again is incapable of holding clear evidence, because even previous Justice Secretary De Lima was unable to file a case in Philippine courts. Because then again, witnesses were scared or unwillingly to testify against Duterte, and local prosecutors did not even pursue charges from this. Then again, it goes against the framing of the government, because their counterfactual to this is to pull him back from the ICC. How can we even do that when our own president is literally on something? He can't even do anything for this country. Next, government also posits to us that accountability should only be domestic, ignoring Philippine context and consequences. Then again, mandating that Duterte to be tried locally does not guarantee again better justice, even if the trial proceeds perfectly, like even if status quo does go again perfectly, the real opportunity cost again is enormous. Now let me proceed to my first argument, right? So what is the international perspective of this and the trial of Duterte in ICC? Because then again, pursuing a domestic trial for Duterte risks damaging the Philippines' international reputation, which carries real economic and political consequences. Why is this so important, especially in a country where the Philippines economy and the image is so unstable? Because then again, even in the Philippines, where high profiles of trials of former leaders signal the internal political instability to the global community. Then again, these investors are foreign partners and international may interpret a Duterte trial as evidence that the Philippines is politically divided, unpredictable, or vulnerable to partisan justice. Now, let me illustrate this to you, panel, right? In the status quo, where Duterte is being investigated in The Hague after the hearing, a politically charged domestic trial, then again, would signal that our legal system is entangled with these political disputes. Then again, international investors may hesitate to fund these infrastructures, technology, or business initiatives, because then again, they fear sudden legal end policies. Then again, prioritizing a trial over stability creates these opportunity costs, because then government also doesn't take into account that it needs funds and money in order to have these kinds of trials. And obviously, if we have these kinds of instability, there will be loss of foreign investment, that slow economic growth, diminished confidence in the Philippines as a safe and predictable market. In other words, even if next, countries deciding whether to cooperate again may perceive domestic prosecution and then again as politically motivated. Then again, even if the Philippines, government will say that, why is this so important? Why is this so important in the debate? Because then again, the Philippines relies on these international things as a country. Next, to my second argument, it's not about also personal retribution, but also the prioritization of institutional reform in our country, which has already been introduced by my LO. It's the fact that the Philippines doesn't have enough resources to even take accountability for their own leaders, because the Philippines today faces this structural and institutional crisis, from under-flooded flood control systems to gaps in the disaster response, healthcare, and even economic salaries. Focusing solely on Duterte's past actions risks symbolic justice, and we are not saying that we are not saying that because we have problems now we should obviously ignore what Duterte has done before. But the fact is, there is multiple chances of accountability. There are multiple chances of whether a government was actually credible. Why are we only choosing to act now? Consider the country's persistent flooding issues, right? While Duterte's actions in the past are scrutinized, current infrastructures infrastructure projects are underfunded, they're delayed or mismanaged.
You know why?
And the people who actually only suffer this are the citizens. Because then again, they suffer the real tangible harms today. And this does not again mean that Duterte should be exempt from accountability. Rather, it highlights that focusing exclusively on his child again diverts attention and resources away from urgent, actionable reforms that could also already improve the Filipinos' lives today. In other words, we can pursue justice then again while also focusing on systemic solutions that actually protect the public now. Now, let me give you analysis. Then again, it is a matter of prioritization. Basically, again, to hold trials, you need money from the government for this to happen. Trials may satisfy a desire for justice, but then again, it does not automatically strengthen governance and also improve the welfare of the Philippines today, or even prevent future abuse from political leaders who are constantly still being voted by the Filipinos. Then again, institutional reform creates systemic long-term protections, systemic protections, which is why we believe that number one, we believe that ICC should continue to do what they do, because then again, we will actually know if the victims of the drug war, for example, will actually receive the justice that they actually been waiting for so many years. Because then again, it's not the purpose of whether Filipinos will be able to see the crimes of Duterte, because already seen in media, but whether they will actually receive the justice that they've been longing for. With that, we're proud to oppose. Thank you.
Thank you for that wonderful speech, DLO. Now to open your case for closing government, calling on member of government. Here.
Hello, am I audible?
Oh, yes, you are.
Wait, so sorry. Okay, I should have my time. Few shout outs. Shout out to my debate parents, Kino and Francis. Shout out to my former partner, Devine, and shout out to Ate Tricia, the most wonderful, radiant, glittering, and shining Sparky Senior. Shout out to Kuya Ino. Shout out to Nanga. Hello everyone, my name is Jeremy. I am the member of government for this round. Few eyes true voice. So sorry. Starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. The question is not about which side have better power to execute someone, but rather where could we improve our institution better, especially in the Philippines. We agree in our opening that the Philippine court system is not weak, it has constitutions. On paper, it is capable of trying even the most powerful officials. But we tell you, the real weakness is political history, because for decades, powerful leaders and political families have often avoided serious legal consequences. If we never allow domestic institutions to prosecute powerful leaders, they never develop the strength or the confidence to do so. The system remains weak precisely because it is not used for the most important issues, for the most important purpose at the end of the day. That is why OO is boxed out, because they don't have the doubt at all. That is why Duterte should face in the Philippine court trial, because the act of prosecution itself strengthen the system at the end of the day. Because the question is not about which side better prosecute the president, but rather the question is how we can make our institutions better. That is how CG will position itself. But firstly, what happens if Duterte face trial actually here in the Philippines? This is a counterfactual explanation. This is how we outweigh opening government, because we'll mechanize better the counterfactual. Firstly, if Duterte is put on trial in the Philippine courts, the process would follow a normal legal procedures, i.e., the prosecutors file charges and collect evidence, say for example, like witnesses' statement. The court then check if the case has enough basis to proceed, and the hearings are held where witnesses speak and evidence is examined at the end of the day. Judges makes decision, which can be applied to higher courts levels. But second, in parallel, the ICC could continue investigations. They might use evidence from the Philippine courts, say for example, to support international accountability. This is highly likely because Duterte is a high-profile figure. The media attention, the public pressure, the international scrutiny make it harder for the system to ignore, delay the trial. In practice, this means that 1, victim testimonies are officially heard and recorded. 2, the judicial systems is fully activated and tested. And 3, the government shows that no one is above the law. But first argument then, if Duterte is tried in Philippine court, it forces institutional growth and accountability. This is how we outweigh OG, because we will position ourselves on how to improve the Philippine better. First mechanism, the courts are forced to prove their independence. Well, Understand, when an ordinary person is prosecuted, there is limited national attention. But when a former president is prosecuted, the entire country watches. Judges know that the decisions will be examined by the media and like international observers. This creates pressure to strictly follow the procedure and legal standards because there's a call-out mechanisms. This is highly likely because judicial actors care about professional reputation. They're seen as biased or politically manipulated in the most important trial of their lifetime. Their legacy is permanently damaged. Under intense public scrutiny, it becomes politically and professionally costly to act improperly, right? Once courts successfully show independence in high-profile cases, it becomes harder for future politicians to openly pressure them. A precedent is created, therefore. But second, it breaks the pattern of elite impunity. In the Philippines, many citizens believe that the powerful leaders never face consequences. That belief shapes political behavior. If Duterte is prosecuted domestically, it sends a signal. Even the most powerful elite on the office in the country is not immune from the law. This changes the incentive for future leaders. Political actors calculate the risk. If prosecution becomes realistic, abuse of power becomes more costly. It's likely because political leaders are rational. When legal risk increases, behavior adjusts. Even if not all abuse disappear, the threshold for extreme actions become higher. Once a former president is tried, future leaders cannot confidently assume immunity. That permanently alters the political landscape. But second, it strengthens the public trust through visible process. The public trust does not improve because of speeches. It improves when people see institutions work at the end of the day. Therefore, a public trial creates transparency. Evidence is presented. Arguments are debated. Legal reasoning is explained. Even if citizens disagree with the outcome, they see the process. That visibility is important. This is highly likely to increase trust because many Filipinos distrust institutions due to secrecy and elite protection. A transparent trial counters that narrative because when people see the due process applied to someone powerful, they begin to believe that the law applies equally. Trust grows not from perfection but from visibility. That visibility is only found in CG. Where are the impacts then? Firstly, you have stronger accountability culture. If a former president is tried domestically, accountability becomes real. This makes it harder for future administration to rely on political protection. Prosecutors and judges will know that the high-level accountability has happened before. This impact is likely because of institutional memory, right? Once a system has successfully handled one major accountability case, repeating that standard becomes easier at the end of the day because it sets a precedent. It shifts the norm from leaders are untouchable to leaders can be held responsible. But second, then, you have the long-term domestic stability. Democracy depends on checks and balances. If courts can discipline the executive branch, power becomes balanced, right? If they cannot, executive branch grows. By prosecuting Duterte domestically, the judiciary system strengthens its position as a co-equal branch of the government. This is highly likely to stabilize the democracy because the institutions that exercise power become more confident and harder to undermine in the future. When courts prove that they can act independently, once political actors hesitate to openly attack or dismantle them. But the second, you have a better national ownership of justice. When justice happens domestically, it reinforces sovereignty and civic confidence. If justice is always external or avoided, citizens feel disconnected from their institutions. A domestic trial tells the citizens that we're capable of judging our own leaders. This increases the civic pride and political engagement. The impact is likely because such legitimacy is tied to self-governance. When institutions handle their own crisis, the citizens feel the greater ownership over the democracy. But second is the extension then. We build a stronger Philippines through institutional integrity. If the Duterte fails the trial, it strengthens the Philippines as a nation by reinforcing the independence and credibility of its institutions, right? Beyond punishing the wrongdoing, the trial demonstrates that political power is not above the law, that it encouraged the systemic reforms and fostered the public trust in governance, laying the foundation for a more stable, accountable, and resilient country. The mechanism here is very simple. One, you have a setting a national standard for accountability. Prosecuting a former president signals to all branches of the government and public officials that abuse of power has consequences. This establishes a deterrent against corruption, human rights, and whatever violation it is. But second, you have a base of public awareness and civic norms. This is a flip analysis coming from opening opposition because media coverage and public discussion ensure that citizens across regions witness justice being applied. People can learn through their rights, the limits of the government's power, and the importance of institutional checks and balances, creating a culture of accountability that transcends beyond the courtroom. You have three levels of impacts. One, you have a stronger institutions nationwide. Courts, law, and whatever it is, and other government agency gain the credibility and operational strength at the end of the day, reducing the likelihood of future impunity. But second, you have a deterrence against corruption and abuse. Future leaders and public officials are less likely to commit violations knowing that the legal accountability is already there enforceable, right? But second, you have increased public trust and national unity. This is how we co-opt the benefits we get coming from opening opposition because citizens see that institutions can act fairly, improving faith in and promoting the cohesion across community. But second, you have a systemic reform and long-term stability. The trial can inspire policy and legal reforms that strengthen the checks and balances, anti-corruption measurements, and human rights protection throughout the Philippines. The reign here is simple. On solvency, the trial actively trenches the institution. On sustainability, reform persists beyond a single case. And national impact, you have improving governance and citizens' trust across the Philippines. It is only on side closing government that we have the delta, that we have the change, that we have the bigger change in all the other houses. This argument is very important because Duterte should face trial. This is not just about punishing the one leader, but it's all about making the Philippines and our institutions better. Proud to propose.
Thank you for that wonderful speech. Now to open the case for closing opposition, calling on MO. Here.
Hello, everyone. Oh, let me turn on my. Okay. Hold up. Okay. Hi guys, I'm Kiarra from University of the Philippines, Cebu. Let me first have my shout outs because this is my first grand finals. So I've started my debate career for like 3 to 4 months ago, and I wouldn't have gone this far without my support system. I'd like first to thank my Lantugi seniors and the Debate Society at the ADI, Kuya Joral, and more. You know who you are. I wouldn't have gone this far without your guidance and training. And also, the Debate Society overall. Everyone in this org are just true definitions of grit and determination. You all have shaped me to who I am today. And especially to Sian and Del, who both became my one call away people every time I need help with debate. So considering this is my first tournament and this is my first time experiencing as first speaker, so it's kind of scary, but after all, debating is never easy in the first place. I'd also like to shout out my friends Dal, Sian, Mix, and Nina for being my support system and keeping me sane all throughout these past few weeks. And I also like to give shout out to Alan, my previous partner and my OG Prime Minister. You have placed a huge chunk of my debate career and you inspire me so much. And also huge shout out to my partner Isah. You are great and you're a super smart debater, and I'm so grateful to have you as my partner, even if we self-sabotage sometimes. But we made it this far. We made it to grand finals. Let's kill it. And lastly, a special shout out to Jay, who's probably watching this stream right now. See you next week. And as I end my February debate marathon, I also owe this to myself for making it this far. So yeah, let's start my speech. I accept POIs after I've stated all of my arguments, and I won't entertain if you budger your POIs. Also, I'll be turning off my camera because I low-key get distracted. So, all right. Wait, let me set up my timer. Okay. Hold up. Okay. All right. Okay. Starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. Go. What does it really mean to bring Duterte home? It is to bring him back in power, back in his multi-million home, while catering to the Supreme Court itself, the Supreme Court that he appointed, the power that he appointed. Let me have a few housekeeping here. The opening government argues that the harms are proximate and that the Philippine courts can handle the case through designated divisions and international observers. We rebut that systematic inequality and corruption are equally proximate, and that appointments and political alliances still shape judicial outcomes. While the incentives of observers remain unclear, they also frame courts as symbols of law rather than instruments of punish, claiming citizens may feel disconnected, but they ignore why the system is entrenched and why it protects perpetrators it produces. Second, the opening opposition then highlights corruption and the incapacity of the Philippine system, but failed to properly mechanize these claims, often shifting the claims like flood control project, which, while structurally relevant, should stray away from the motion. Finally, the closing government argued that the domestic trial will be bureaucratic and domestic, but downplayed the harms of bureaucracy and claimed visibility will ensure accountability. However, if we put it in a wide scale, there will be more visibility in our world. Why? Because in the Philippine context, visibility is not even seen because media is suppressed. Why is their fake news so evident then? Moving forward, I will be dissecting this motion in 3 parts. First, I will reframe this debate. Second, I will reestablish the correct burdens of this debate. Third, I will advance our extensions. First, status quo. What did Duterte really do? Rodrigo Duterte presided over a violent drug war. He is facing a human rights violation, a violation that is under a violation in the international law. Yes,
1,000 died. But we frame this power as a magnitude does not materialize in isolation. Why? The more urgent question is, what kind of system allowed that violence to be operationalized? Let's characterize Philippine Supreme Courts then. The Supreme Courts of the Philippines is doctrinally independent, but still structurally embedded. Why? Because courts operate within a system dominated by elite families and patronage network. This is why the rich get justice right away, while the poor gets 10 years in prison for something they didn't do. So what is our world then? We live in an imperialistic, bureaucratic, and a capitalistic system shaping our executive, our legislative, and our judicial structures. This is the system Duterte operated in and the one we still inhabit. So how do we mechanize our world? Let's have a historical analysis here. Historically, our independence was granted by the United States. They designed our political institution and even our Supreme Court in the Philippines. Those institutions were never fundamentally reformed. Why? Let's analyze the 1987 Philippine Constitution. Far from being ruptured, it is a product of compromise. What does this mean? The political elites who survived previous regimes are still the ones making amendments. Despite radical reform, we can never clamor or push that this system is fair. How can we be confident that a constitution anchored by the Supreme Court will be neutral when the constitution itself was maintained by the very elites who benefit from it? One of it is Duterte. So who are these elites then? The politicians who craft the rules, who decide how they apply, and who determines the limit or reform. Our system then is not neutral. It functions on dynasties and elite networks. These structures preserve a system built under the American colonialism, and that structure shapes the outcome of today. Even if the outcome, if you put Duterte in the Philippine Supreme Court, is already predictable, he will still be free because he have media, he have the elites who can advocate for him. Our stakeholders here are everyone who have been a victim of state coercion, families who lost their loved ones, and the poor targeted under the drug war. They operated under the system, and any solution that ignores the system structure will basically fail them. So what is our extensions then? Burden rather. The spirit of emotion is truth value. Where can victims of state coercion obtain accountability? Fiat is irrelevant. The question is whether the system can process the case in a way that actually delivers justice. What is our extensions then? First, democratic backsliding. What does this mean? Under the 1987 Philippine Constitution, democracy in the Philippines is procedurally safeguarded. Separations of power exist, judicial review exists, yet proceduralism without structural insulation allows this elite capture. This is the system that benefited. I'm not done yet with my extensions. Benefited from the leverage from this. How do I mechanize this? First, connections and political infrastructures. The Philippine political system operates through relational power networks. Judicial appointments originate from this executive shortlist. Duterte, as president, had appointed power over key judicial figures, influence over police and prosecutorial agencies, and leverage through coalition-based patronage. Third, politicization and manipulation remain proximate in our case because courts and enforcement agencies may be independent on paper, but they are being incentivized or embedded by the elite-dominated ecosystem. Accountability is unfiltered through networks and influence. The impact here is clear. Trying Duterte under the domestic system risks selective justice, it risks delays, and it also has a politicized outcome. The delta here is that the difference between domestic trial and truly impartial accountability is always structural, leading to a second extension. The system produced to Duterte. We cannot solve a problem using the same system that created it. The reason Duterte propagated his drug war so efficiently is because democracy is eroding. Checks and balance among PNPs are easily bypassed when personal incentives dominate and the Philippines operates under a weak democracy. What perpetuates Duterte's power? First, the strongman politics. The presidential system is personally driven. Second, the electoral procedure and the patronage economy, campaigns, and political survival depend on the relational loyalty rather than the ideology itself. Third, the oligarchic continuity and public resentment. Post-1987, liberal democracy preserved elite dominance in land, in media, and in business, which is clearly evident today. Growth was uneven, urban crime narratives were amplified, and inequality then persists. The Constitution promised social justice. The market still delivered this stratification, and that the gap become a political fuel. Then Duterte was produced by the system and it was not apart from it. So what is our data here? Removing Duterte from office or trying him domestically does not dissolve the structural condition that has enabled him to do this. My third extension then, why the ICC is better in our world. The International Criminal Court operates on a non-partisan, a globally accountable framework. Why? Because it is detached from the local networks that facilitated Duterte's power. It maintains legitimacy because its processes are visible to the whole wide world, and it cannot easily act on partisan or elite incentives without scrutiny. ICC intervention matters because domestic institutions are politically captured or unwilling to prosecute. international jurisdiction is activated through complementarity. While ICC alone cannot reform domestic politics, it does not hold the individual accountable in a way that domestic courts cannot. Its global optics operates pressure from transparency and reinforces checks and balances. What is the impact here? Trying Duterte domestically risk recycling injustice under the same system that produced him. ICC trial ensures that the accountability is insulated from the elite capture. It elevates the visibility and restores, at least in part, faith and justice for victims of state coercion. So if you really want to bring him home, then sure, bring him home. But make sure you lock your homes, because you might be the next target. Unless you are stakeholders benefiting from the Philippine state, you will be the next victim. With all these reasons, never been prouder to oppose.
Thank you for that wonderful speech. Now to close the case for closing government, calling on government whip. Here.
Hi, can I check if I'm audible and visible? Wait. Hello.
Yes to both.
Okay, thank you so much. Hi everyone, I'm Camille, pronoun she, her. Before I begin my speech, allow me to do a few shout-outs. Firstly to my family, my parents. They don't know I made it to Grants, but hey. To our trio Devine, who couldn't join us because of our OTC, we miss you. Our team name is in your honor. To Kuya Kino, Nong Francis at the Fly, Manas Hugh, Trisha Gav, Freya, Nong Ino, CJ Rick, and the rest of the PBBS. TSH CRC Dabsok, I miss you. Robert Clyde, Mir, Isabulian, Stacey Luigi, and of course, Kuya Calvin from UP Men, Kuya Sean from XU, I miss you guys. I hope you miss me too. Anyway, POI's true voice. If I don't take the POI, it's probably because I don't have enough time. Anyway, I'll be starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. A few housekeeping first. Let's take a look at the opening exchange. The clashes were mainly on whether domestic systems or the ICC is better at holding Duterte's trial, right? Sure, this is a good issue, but Jeremy already answered it and I'll continue to engage later. But we tell you then that the most important issue in this debate is the Philippine courts. Why is it or why is it not better for holding Duterte's trials? Where do we make it better and where do we make it credible? Why is this true? Because take a look at status quo. That's literally the main issue of the motion on why is Duterte being held for trial in ICC and not in the Philippines. Because there's a perception that there's incapacities in the domestic systems. And that's what CJ has already answered coming from Jeremy. But then the LO sets up the premise that holding Duterte's trial in the Philippines would take away the credibility of the state because he's already being held for trial in ICC. This doesn't really make any sense to me insofar as the motion just calls for Duterte facing trial in Philippine courts, meaning that there's no burden for us to prove the credibility of the PH systems. Our burden coming from God is only to prove why it's pragmatically better for Duterte to face trial in the Philippines. We burden push on up then to actually tell us why it's ultimately better to hold his trials in ICC, aside from holding Duterte accountable, because accountability has already been proven to be inexclusive as it still happens on our side. We concede then that ICC may be a better institution somehow, insofar as it isn't really tied to any state or political ideology, but we tell you that our systems are still capable and competent, and it doesn't put any question to that. Now notice that it's even more reason to want to improve our domestic systems, and you get that better on CG because we actually mechanize how we do that. Check your notes coming from Jeremy. But on to my responses. Firstly to CO. CO is weird. Amo comes into this debate telling us that bringing him home is bringing him back in power. But I question the relevance, as I don't really see how it answers their burden in any way. But then it doesn't really make any sense insofar as they never really gave us any substantive proof and likelihoods that he will get back into power. But we tell you that's untrue insofar as the public is now more well informed. We literally see a lot of his supporters shifting their views because they're waking up and they're becoming more educated. So meaning then that their case is boxed out. They also talk about how the Constitution and the judicial system is shaped by selective justice and patronization. This is untrue because the Constitution was made before Duterte and it literally went through rigorous processes, and you can't even make modifications to it that easily because it already rigorously prepared provisions and was formed to prevent any modifications that would come out of corrupt interests. Then on to OO. LO comes into this debate talking about how it's better that Duterte's trials are held by ICC because they say it's more credible. This buys into the harms of how the psyche of the people becomes that domestic systems are incompetent and there's no way of saving it. So meaning then that it's actually worse off on their side. But then they also talk about how it promotes unity in Philippine elections and like unites people somehow. But I question the relevance because again, I don't see how that answers their burden. But then I also question the truth because I don't think there was any substantive proof that it actually promotes unity. But there's also no likelihoods of it actually happening because they weren't able to provide it to us. But then DLO comes into this debate claiming that the Philippine systems does not have the capacity. And they also talk about how there's other figures and corruption who are not held accountable, like for example, the flood control projects. But then we question the relevance because we're just talking about why it's better to hold Duterte's trials in the Philippines, right, and not more so like these other issues. But I'll still engage. This actually puts more pressure to actually better our domestic institutions and systems because this shows us the problem that if we can't hold those people accountable, then there's something wrong. So meaning then that we literally tell you that Duterte's trials becomes the precedent to hold these figures accountable. Because if an influential and literally well-loved figure is held accountable in Philippine courts, there's nothing stopping us from holding other figures accountable for their actions. But OO also says that domestic trial becomes less legitimate because of corruption, because Duterte has connections and networks, for example. Sure, even if this is true, we bite the bullet and say that we can still have a legitimate trial domestically because even if he does have connections, there's literally public scrutiny already that pressures for transparency during these trials. This then rolls over to exposing that kind of corruption in these systems if they are actually true. And that pushes for more reform and change within these systems, meaning that we actually improve domestic systems. There's more solvency on our side and we achieve that change. But on to OG. OG calls for legitimized trial of Duterte. They say that the Philippines has functioning courts and systems that can hold Duterte accountable, and they should be the one to do that because the crimes happen domestically. Their entire case engages on which institution can better hold Duterte accountable, right? As with the open exchange. But we extended their case when we told you that this is really about where we can better our domestic institutions. And Jeremy has already mechanized that. So then why do we win? We told you coming from CG that Duterte facing trial in Philippine courts will set up a precedent for holding officials who have a history of misconduct accountable. The reason why he's being held at trial in ICC is because there's the perception that PH cores are incompetent. This is worse off in opposition because the moment international institutions meddle in the affairs of a sovereign state, you promote the psyche that the justice system and your courts are failing or they're a fail. This is harmful because then the judicial and legislative foundations for which the state is built upon are put into question. This is bad because then you don't really get any improvements insofar as the public will have the belief instilled in them that they can no longer trust these systems, as Jeremy has already proven in his speech, and society will continue to perceive that we need to rely or to constantly rely on international systems when there are similar problems that will arise in the future. We place immense pressure to our own courts in our world to hold politicians like Duterte accountable for the damages their actions during their term have made. We actually make our courts better because there's already public scrutiny, for example, and outrage and calls for transparency and pressure for accountability to ensue. Why is this the most important thing in this debate, and why is this debate winning? We already compare what's happening in status quo, where even the public outrage, a lot of corrupt officials are still not held accountable, meaning that there's an issue. This worsens with the psyche that there's a necessity for international influence. When we set up the precedent that influential figures like Duterte can be held accountable in our courts, then we actually serve justice and we make it more likely for accountability to happen. And for all of those reasons proposed.
Thank you for that wonderful speech. Now to finally close this debate, we now call on opposition with Here.
Okay, here. I hope I am both audible and visible. So in case my Wi-Fi does lag, please feel free to interrupt me. Before anything else, I'm gonna do a short shout out because this is my first ever grants. So okay, I'll do it quick. Okay. All right. So I wrote this shout out last night despite having no assurance of getting into grants because I am delusional. PND is my first official debate break and my first tournament in almost a year, and I am most especially honored that we were able to reach grants. This goes to say that this wouldn't have been possible without the following. So, few shout outs, and I'm gonna make this worthwhile because I don't know when or I will be able to reach grants again. So, first shout out to Ate Adi Tournament Cap for waiving our reg fees in this tournament. Your efforts to democratize debate is always remarkable. Shout out to Kuya Del Cinco, Kuya Leaf Fial, Romel Tala, and Kuya Adrian Magno, Kuya JJ for the constant and very helpful feedback and PCs. We wouldn't have gotten this far without your guidance. To Ate Gasa for organizing cross trainings, ensuring we have trainings and spars, and of course to the entire UP Cebu and Dugi Debate Society for the support. Shout out to Ate Kiana for putting up with me as a debate partner even though I'm still adjusting. Shout out to the other freshies, Kath, CK, Kevin, Crispin, and Joral. I hope we compete together soon. Shout out to also Vince and Joseph because they're also here at PND in the preliminary runs. Okay. So also okay, I'll make this quick. Shout out to Ate Ala from the UP Min Debate Varsity for the post day one Chica. I'm hearing all my struggles in the preliminary rounds. Shout out to Dylan from XU because I had to train for 1 week with Ate Kiana instead of preparing with him for a different tournament. Thank you so much for understanding. And most importantly, lastly, shout out to my partner, my boyfriend Theo, for always listening to my debate related rants in Chica, for the effort to find the right words in a circumstance he has never been in before. You really find empathy that it doesn't take the same exact experiences to care and be compassionate. Happy Mansuri, I love you. Okay, so, all right. Okay, starting my timer now. Okay. All right, setting up my timer. Okay. Okay, starting my speech in 3, 2, and then 1. Before anything else, a few call-outs and clarifications. Number 1, this is a THBT value assessment debate. Thus, Gov cannot fiat a formation of a specific domestic court or integration of international institutions. Understand the motion type. Second, the debate is about where do we get better reparative justice and accountability, not the distant secondary outcomes, but the situation at hand. Third, CJ just overachieves their benefits beyond what their model could cater. They don't establish actor incentives in the middle analysis behind their pushes. Okay, rebuilding then. Number 1, they told us that CG told us that they have no burden to prove why courts are capable, only to pragmatically prove why they should bring Duterte home. Okay, tell me then what are you supposed to do after bringing him home? Of course, you are to trial him in courts. That's why you question the capacity. Otherwise, the debate wouldn't happen. You're being operative under convenient framing. You're so uncharitable. Second, they told us that there's no substantive proof on our side and likelihood of bringing him to power. Oh, come on, stop lying. We didn't overburden. We never told you that we would re-elect him into power. Chair, check your notes. We didn't do this. We never said this. We only told you that it would be much better to trial him on the ICC because of its non-partisan framework and the better visibility that you get because of the flawed Philippine Constitution. Responses then. Starting with opening government, what did they give us? Opening government told us that it is better on their side because you get to appropriate and better rights to punish him under our own laws and say never again to Duterte's war on drugs. Let me tell you that this isn't mutually exclusive. You can still campaign for never again against the war on drugs, even if it happens internationally. The delta is a scale of visibility in the extent the process becomes non-partisan. On us closing opposition, we get better clamor the moment there's larger public visibility on external and international scale because you do not limit the issue domestically. You get more opinions, you get more eyes, you get more call-out mechanisms. The clamor for never again is stronger on our side. On your side, there might be clamor for never again, but you risk homogenizing and concentrating the narrative regarding his conviction, making it more susceptible and vulnerable to political manipulation, black propaganda, or any other political strategies to dismiss the public. Number 1, notice how the ICC Facebook page always has angry reactions from Filipinos because of misconceptions and misinformed narratives. The same situation happens and gets worse when you limit it to the page context because you concentrate the same narrative to the same majority opinion that is closer on a national proximity. Second, then, they told us that they can just transfer the custody and they would establish a special independent court to handle this separate from status quo and have international monitoring. In case you don't know, this is a THBT truth value motion. You cannot overextend your fiat. You argue based on your status quo conditions, not build a separate world. Know your burden. This is not a policy motion. They told us that courts are symbols of law and not foreign tools, and this is worse on our side because you get external pressure that is similar to the colonial pressure. Come on, what are you even on? The ICC is not operative under a particular country following a specific nation's constitution. It is global, thus it is non-partisan. There's global optics to maintain and non-partisan frameworks to operate under. Otherwise, the ICC fails. The ICC isn't your colonizer. I don't understand how you arrived to this. They told us that you create a culture better on their side because they create a culture where the leaders can answer to their own courts, and that corruption is not to remove Philippines from the narrative, but to integrate international viewers via monitoring. I've already told you why you cannot fiat this. This is not a policy motion. But fine, let's be charitable and engage. The case you're giving is a high burden. You have to mechanize this integration. If your mechanization of integration is only to extend the extent of monitoring, you overachieve your impacts without enough middle analysis. If you do monitoring, you might as well not have the international actors because it doesn't operate under the global constitution, only domestic, which my member already told you why is so deeply flawed. They told us that they would force the nation to confront the problems as a nation, and this is better. They explained to us a child-parent mechanism and how it is better if a parent confronts their child. But I'm sorry, I don't think you can narrow the scope of the debate of the entire Philippines into an individual child-parent relationship. You cannot make that parallel, and you're undermining the scope. Your mechanism doesn't work. Chair, I don't think it's creditable. There's no mechanism. On us, you get better restorative justice and reclamation the moment you entrust the child into a non-partisan institution with better visibility, even if it means lesser proximity. Because so what if it's less geographically proximate? We can take this as a trade-off for better visibility, better checks and balances, considering that the Philippines is an eroding democracy, which my member already explained. They told us that this is better because this resonates with the Filipino for restorative justice, and that this wouldn't become a remote TV show. Principled layer then, it is worse on your world because you tolerate the injustice of the people, because you saw the issue under the same system and do the trial under the same system that failed these people. I've already told you why we are willing to take geographical proximity as a trade-off for better transparency, clamor, and non-partisan trial for accountability. This is where you best get reparative justice. Moving on to opening opposition, then what did they give you? They told us that this is bad because this would politicize the true results and this would affect elections, and that the ICC stands because the Philippines has been so incompetent. No, thank you. And that this would risk symbolic justice if you focus on Duterte's past actions. Well, they are not wrong. These cases aren't central on the motion. They don't really engage with a core clash coming from opening government in your top half. We win on proximity. They tell us that you skew election results because supporters of Duterte would vote for the same people and the least who supported him in the heat of the moment. But this impact isn't as proximate to the motion. I don't understand why the outcome of elections is the most important and most urgent issue at hand, insofar as we should discuss whether or not we should bring him home. Second, it is only from a memory of status quo, which is democratic stop badgering, which is democratic erosion and backsliding, and provided structurally rooted discussions regarding the Constitution. We talk about courts and constitutions, they talk about election outcomes, we are more proximate. And come on, please, let's argue on the motion. Our cases are more important because we talk about the trial at hand and establish incentive structures regarding prosecution. Whereas OO talks about distant economic outcomes. Focus on proximity, people. You are opening house, you should know this, we are the better opposition. Moving on to closing government, then what did they give us? Zhea told us that if we never persecute leaders, then the system will never do so, and it is better to do so because we will strengthen the system. They told us that on their side, it's not been 1 minute yet. They force institutional growth and accountability and strengthen the public trust. Response: you don't strengthen the systems the moment you persecute Duterte in the PH. Notice how this push coming from them doesn't have any form of mechanism. This just overarches an impact without explanation. Chair, you cannot buy this. There's a huge chunk of missing middle analysis right here. They have to explain current capacity of the system of the Philippines institution to do this, which they don't. They only tell you that you make it stronger if you give it more challenges beyond what it can handle. Sorry to tell you, but you cannot tiger parent the Philippine Constitution. CG is following the same issue again. They overachieve their benefits beyond what their modular mechanism could cater. They don't establish actor incentives and middle analysis behind their pushes. They told you that you get better visibility when you expose the Filipino public, such as the media and general society. Well, this is not wrong. Notice how this is non-exclusive. Visibility happens on both sides insofar as this is literally a trial of the president. But it's better on our side because of scale, because you don't limit its visibility on national level. We get this internationally. Remember I told you about the media suppression. Your public scrutiny and mechanism is marginal impact. I've already weighed many times as to why we get better visibility. On accountability, we get better accountability because the ICC is non-partisan. It's operative under global optics, not simply the copy of a US where democratic backsliding is more possible. You have to answer the push on constitutional flaw and weakness. They told us that they get civic pride in national legitimacy when handled by the Filipino, but again they override their impacts beyond what their model could cater. I don't get a clear step-by-step process on this. For this to work, they still have to explain the middle analysis of capacity on the status of the page short to process such high-stakes case in the Philippines, despite the democratic backsliding and political manipulation. Your visibility mechanism isn't enough to solve this. Philippine media is repressed or dominated by oligarchs. Philippine Gensoc narrative is still largely homogeneous. That is favorable to Duterte. That is why we're having the debate in the first place. Because of homogenized narratives, I don't understand why this would set a precedent that Philippines could convict peace politicians in the court aren't capable of arriving at a successful outcome in the first place. All those reasons, closing opposition win.
Thank you for that wonderful speech, and congratulations everyone for a wonderful round. You may now virtually cross the house. For the judges, let's go to the Discord room 1, deliberation room.
Hopefully the okay, thank you everyone. Hopefully the stream is also out. We'll give you time to rest a bit. We'll be able to do awarding as soon as the ballots are in. That's approximately hopefully by 5:30.